Hi, thank you for having me. Here we go. My talk is on the Flora of the East Bay, a new book by Lech Naumovich and Barbara Ertter. My purpose here is the purpose of the project actually is to update a 2013 checklist of East Bay vascular plants, which itself was the second edition of a 2002 checklist. The authors renamed the book Flora because of its scope and purpose, which is to serve as a thorough and essential reference guide to the plant life of the East Bay. To give some background, earlier this year, Holly Forbes of Save Mount Diablo knew that Lech had begun work on this project and that the California Native Plant Society East Bay chapter was fundraising for it. So she invited us to write a grant for the for the Bowerman Science and Research Grant Program. And so thank you. As an organization dedicated to native plants in Alameda and Contra Costa counties, CNPS East Bay chapter has always been deeply involved with providing information about our local native plants. My role has been project manager, copy reader, and cheerleader because as a botanist, I use local floras all the time, and I know how valuable they are both for professionals and for amateurs. Why am I here? Well, the authors live in Idaho and Montana, so they send their greetings, yeah. So I'm going to start with some highlights, tell you how the flora is put together, why the flora is a useful tool, and how you can get involved. So first, this is Barbara Ertter, the creator of the East Bay checklist, and someone you already know as, oops, how did I do that? There we go. Co-author of the updated Flora of Mount Diablo, which you all know well. This is Lech Naumovich, who was co-author on the last checklist, and now is the senior author on the Flora. So here's some highlights. The Flora has updated information on all East Bay wild growing vascular plants, with some plants added and others removed, dozens more reclassified, and thousands of records evaluated to add or correct to the distributional information. It has a new list of bryophytes. Those are non-vascular plants, which include groups of mosses, that's the most common, liverworts, and hornworts, all tiny little plants. It includes more information about common names, status, terminology definitions, and most helpful for people like me, more information about how to distinguish similar plants from each other. Fun facts, the Flora has listings for 2,052 vascular plants, a net increase of 42 since the last checklist was prepared. Of these, 1,329 of them are native taxa, and the other ones are 557 non-native species and 166 that are called waifs. Waifs are plants that are not indigenous here, but are growing independently, that is in the wild without human management or care, but are not known to be reproducing either by seed or vegetatively in the wild. We've got 211 bryophytes, of which 210 are native. And we have one non-native on campus here, so thank you. So the East Bay supports 20% of all the California native plant taxa in just 1% of the land area. So I'm just going to give you a moment to let that sink in, because even though when you look across the landscape, you see a lot of non-natives, we have a remarkable native plant diversity. Some species are at the edge of their range, some are uncommon or rare, some are here and nowhere else. Mount Diablo, of course, has some of our best examples, but we have many others, often in very specialized habitats. So even in an area that has a tremendous human population and is well studied botanically, changes in knowledge continue to take place at a actually fairly impressive rate. So now I'd like to talk about how a flora is put together. Originally, the authors combed through herbarium specimens, the physical, actual herbarium, floristic studies like the Flora of Mount Diablo and others, statewide floras, technical reports, and CNPS records of rare plants. Herbarium records are now data-based, so electronic data can be searched for new records. Also, citizen science reports are available through sources like iNaturalist and CalFlora. And of course, there's a shout out to the many, many contributors to knowledge, especially Diane Lake of the Native Plant Society's East Bay Unusual and Significant Plants team. They go out and systematically monitor known populations and search for new ones for some of the least common plants. But many other people contribute information as well. So once these mountains of records have been amassed, begins the serious work to evaluate them. Botanists are only happy when they have a physical specimen to document a plant record, because many diagnostic plant features can't easily be photographed or documented in other ways. A physical collection like this can be examined and re-examined by experts, and specimens also provide samples for genetic work. As a result, herbarium collections are considered the gold standard, but reliable botanist accounts were readily accepted, and less well-vetted records were examined carefully. The more unusual the record, that is, a report of a species well outside its range or in an unusual habitat, the more critically the authors evaluate it. Sometimes these reports were accepted, sometimes they were rejected, but the authors kept records of all these so that with new information, they can be reevaluated. Keeping up with new records is one part of the challenge, but the other is keeping up with the science. Huge changes in plant taxonomy have taken place at all levels since genetic analysis has become an essential tool. Fortunately, the UC and Jepson Herbaria continually update California nomenclature online with the Jepson Flora. The next level of detail is keeping track of plant distribution. New records are eagerly added to the flora once they've been vetted, and erroneous records are just as eagerly weeded out. But to best describe the distribution of plants in the East Bay, the authors created these 8 bioregions. These are areas that are ecologically similar enough that a plant found in one part of the bioregion might reasonably be found in another part of it. I don't know if I can do this pointer well enough to see, but so far on the left is the Molati region, the smallest one with some coastal prairies. The flatland region runs along the bay. And then we've got B for the Bay Hills, B for the valley section up along the Carquinez Strait and into the delta, D for the Diablo region. L is the Livermore region in this Tri-Valley area there. Hamilton Range is down. It's actually the dividing point is Niles Canyon right there. But this is the more eastern and higher mountains to the south and east. And then the Altamont is the mostly treeless area in between Livermore and the Central Valley. So here's some ways that the flora helps East Bay knowledge. One is keeping track of new introductions. Lech feels a special responsibility to keep up with introductions of new species to the East Bay because some become invasives. By putting out timely information in the flora, even if they're not in the Jepson manual, users can become aware and potentially manage invasives before they get out of hand. And even though I was mostly sort of one step away from the authorship, I did make a little tiny contribution here. This is Carex divulsa. This plant has been mistakenly sold in the nursery trade as a native sedge. So once I discovered it was in my native plant garden, I spent the next several years getting rid of it. But yeah, it was a lot of work. Just being in a garden, though, was not enough to qualify it for being in the flora, because the flora it only deals with plants that are growing in the wild. So we searched CalFlora and found a record by a very reputable observer in Wildcat Regional Park. So that was our latest addition to the flora. So keep an eye out for it, though. Another function is monitoring plants that are on the edge. Our 2-county area supports 21 federally and state-listed plants, 124 plants that are ranked by the California Native Plant Society statewide, and about 900 more that are considered unusual and significant in the East Bay, meaning they're at the edge of their range, thought to be declining in the East Bay or elsewhere, and even relatively abundant elsewhere, but uncommon here in the East Bay. CNPS's Unusual Plants team monitors hundreds of records every year, but the flora helps the user see if they've encountered an unusual sighting of some sort. This is our iconic pallid manzanita, a species that is completely restricted to our 2-county area and only on marine sandstone habitats. This is a happy story. Plants that are thought to be extinct are a special case, but tracking them sometimes yields exciting results. This tiny caper-fruited Tropidocarpum was thought to be extinct since the 1950s, but it was rediscovered this spring by an astute botanist, so we updated that in the flora. And then the next thing, you received a handout on your seat, or you might have picked it up coming in, but there's so much detail that I wanted to share with you, and it was just going to be impossible to see it on the screen. So grab your sheet of paper. The front page is the front page is the colored page, and it shows you the information contained in the vascular plant section of the book. It's color-coded, so it's a little easier to see things, but the I on the first column in white is introduced plants. Yellow is cross-references, so something that you might have known as convolvulus in the past. The native species have been reassigned to a genus called Calistegia, so that shows you where to look for the name that you used to know, and now it's in a different place. W is that peach color, the waif, and that's a species that is actually not native here, but apparently not persisting in the wild or reproducing. And then I picked a page with a lot of native plants. The green shading is native plants, and with an asterisk is an unusual plant. So the next column shows you the scientific name, family affiliation in brackets, common name if there is one. And then the next column is the rarity status. And again, I picked a page with a lot of examples here, but the ones with a U means that they're locally unusual or significant. A C means that it has a state rank, and if there was a federal or state ranking, that would have another code. The next column is the codes for distribution. So B would be Bay Hills, D, Diablo, H, Hamilton, and the number next to it is the quality or reliability of the data. And one thing that the authors are interested in is if there's something that's not a 1, which is the gold standard, a herbarium specimen, then they're interested in documentation of some of those less reliable records to document them for sure. The next column, this little small column, is the life form. W is for woody, H is for herbaceous. Other categories are grass, aquatic, and ferns. And then the big column on the right-hand side is just information that you might want in the field, telling you how to distinguish related species. And believe me, I love that part. Okay, so then I just wanted to say one other thing. Let's see. Lech had long wanted to include a list of bryophytes because these are truly a new frontier for many botanists. And Lech wanted to raise awareness to make it easier for people to get to know these fascinating but poorly known plants. And I don't know if she's in the audience, but I just want to give a big shout out to Katie Colbert, who assisted in this project by methodically reviewing all the available publications on California bryophytes, compiling name, synonymy, distribution, and habitat for this book. And so to turn over the handout, you can see the information on bryophytes is a lot more sparse. So we need to populate that, thank you. This page shows you, this is a moss page, so that first column, the M's mean that it's a moss. Scientific name, brackets for the family, and then common name if there is one. Rarity status, and this is pretty typical. We don't have enough information to really assess rarity status for most mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. So there's just one here. The next one is distribution, and most of the distribution is not well known. Mount Diablo has been well surveyed for bryophytes, so the MTD means that this plant has been seen on Mount Diablo. Sometimes we have some bioregions, B for Bay Hills, H for Hamilton. Sometimes we only know the county, and so there's some codes for Contra Costa and Alameda counties there. Bryophytes are funny. They don't really respond to plant communities so much as substrate. So the code in the next column tells you that S is a moss, in this case, that grows on soil. R is for rock, T is for trees, and SR is a sort of a specialized soil over rock, which many mosses inhabit. And then you can see that it's kind of brief, but the next column just shows you what information is known about sort of microhabitat or distribution. Let's see, we already did that. So what you can do, well, grab your field equipment, go outside, make some observations, and share them with us. We have a special website, a special email address that you can send observations to, and I have already started marking up my proof of the new book. So send us some information and share it with us. Thank you. And finally, I just want to say thank you to the Save Mount Diablo Mary Bowerman Fund for allowing this and supporting this work. Thank you.
When are the books available?
Oh, thank you. So they're at the printer, and I'm going to pick up the first sort of couple of boxes of them, and they'll be available at Native Here Nursery, which is the Native Plant Society's native plant nursery up in Tilden Park tomorrow during open hours. And then if you look at the back page, you'll also see that there's a website that you can order books and have them mailed to you, or you can order them and pick them up at the nursery. But tomorrow and Monday for the rest, yeah. Anything else? Yes, in the back.
Sort of a more general question about distribution of plants in the region. I'm wondering if anyone in your group or overall the botanical community around here has noticed species becoming more common that were more typical of the drier, hotter places in the south, moving north. And I've also been told that several different organizations are actively restoring habitat using species more typical of the south around here to sort of like get ahead of climate change and things like that. Any trends like that?
Wow, I don't think I am prepared to answer that question. It's certainly been a topic under much discussion and thought. I think that we want to be careful to think carefully about what we're doing if we're moving things into habitats where they didn't exist before. I mean, probably a more conservative way of approaching might be to look at local genotypes and possibly think about those moving rather than species. But yeah, it's all, it's what we have to think it through because climate change is happening and we have to figure out how to best protect our resources. I was going to say one thing though, this is kind of cute. When the announcement came out for this colloquium, I received an email from a colleague who works primarily in the Central Valley and out of the Modesto area. And he said, wow, great, you got an East Bay flora. And he was aware of it. But he said, like, how about a flora of the Diablo range? I've got these plant lists from, all these San Joaquin, Stanislaus, Merced counties. Let's collaborate. So just saying, there's some big interest there. Yeah.
Of the 46 additions to this checklist, do you have a breakdown of what were like newly introduced species versus range extensions or like newly described species or taxonomical changes?
Well, we have, so roughly 1,300 species are native taxa, and roughly 550 are non-native, but are established in the East Bay. They're reproducing and are well established, and then 166 are waifs. I think I went by it pretty fast, but I don't know if this is answering your question, but we do have some, there were net changes of a couple of dozen species of natives. And that's, let me just say, I didn't do all the work that it took to get this. I'm not the author, but that's a net change. So some species got booted out, some got brought in, and the net change was a couple of dozen native species and several dozen non-natives. So they're always tracking them. And information changes because there always are new records within our 2-county area.
Yeah, I was just more curious about the actual update compared to the last checklist.
Yeah, those are numbers since the last checklist. Yeah, and I guess another thing I didn't mention, and this just has to do with more eyes, more people knowing that there's something they're seeing that is noteworthy or could be noteworthy, is that the first checklist was something like 1,600 taxa, and the second checklist was something like 1,800 taxa, and here we are with the Flora, which is essentially kind of a third edition, that's got 2,000, and that's partly because there are more introductions, really, for the most part. There are some discoveries of things that people didn't have records of that were nearby, but now we've got them in the East Bay, and of course, new introductions. So the state of knowledge is always going to add more complexity to what we know.